everyone. Welcome to the Planning Commission public hearing regular meeting for the City of Farmington Hills. Today's date, September 15, 2022. We're at Farmington Hills City Hall. Meeting is held as advertised. I'm calling the meeting order. Roll call. I think we're missing two commissioners, Danielle and Marissa are absent tonight. Staff, is there any amendments to the agenda for the commission to consider? None. Okay, can I have a motion to approve the agenda as presented?
So moved. Second.
Moved by John, supported by Barry. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, tonight we have a couple items. We have a public hearing and we also have a regular meeting item. We'll start with the public hearing item. As advertised, it is revised PUD Plan 3 of 2021. Location is 32680 Northwestern Highway. The proposal is construction of a multiple family apartment building in a B2 community business and a B3 general business district. Tonight's action requested of the Planning Commission is to make a recommendation to City Council. The applicant and owner is NWH Holdings. NWH Holdings. At this point, do we ask the developer to come forward and make a presentation on their proposal, or do we start with staff?
Let's start with the developer
Okay.
in the case of a public hearing.
Do we have the developer's representative here to make a presentation on their?
Certainly. Yeah,
please,
Keith Phillips with the Think Shop Architects
Please introduce yourself and your address, please. Thank you.
and Brighton, Michigan.
Jim Butler with PEA Group. Address is 1849 Pond Run, Auburn Hills, Michigan, 48326.
Good evening. Thank you.
As you recall, we've been in front of you a couple of occasions. We did seek and was approved for a qualification on this PUD. We're here this evening to talk about the final determination for this. After our last meeting, we did have a long conversation internally with ourselves as designers and the owners, and thought about this project long and hard, and some of the issues that were brought up related to height and density. What we did is we kind of went back to the drawing board, and what we've been able to do with this project is to lower this. Previously, we had a building that was 69 feet high. The building you're looking at today is 55 feet high. But what we were able to do, and I think Keith has passed around a model that you see, essentially we're taking the building and dropping it into the ground. And the parking, a majority of the parking, over 260 some odd spaces, is going to be below the building. So you won't see it, and and the rest we made up with surface parking. In doing so, we also reduced the number of units. The last time you saw it, we had 253 units. Today, we have 217 units. Essentially, the layout remained the same from the previous renditions you've seen. We have a single point access off of Northwestern Highway. We do have 360-degree circulation around the building. There are port access points into the garage all the way around the building. I know there was a letter in your packet from your fire department. I've had conversations with them, and there's another email, I believe, that probably was added to your packet. Jason and I had a long conversation about circulation and access, and after we had that discussion, he was comfortable with what we had done, and he understands it. We've eliminated a lot of the dead-end areas on the site, and removing those units allowed us to expand that courtyard again that you see internally. Keith, you want to talk about it a little?
Yeah, again, you know, the whole concept was to try to keep a clean building, try to conceal the parking. We've got 2/3 of the parking below grade and out of sight. So even in the courtyard area, you don't experience that, and it's a positive for the people who live there. Again, Jim mentioned that we lost that center area, that center, what would you call it, peninsula, I guess, which would bisect that courtyard. This allowed us to open that back up. It just makes a lot more sense. Our density is still comparative to the units across the Northwestern, as well as what's going on in the neighboring communities. And again, we're just trying to provide as many amenities to the people on the site as possible. To address the design, we went with a little bit more progressive design, and as Jim mentioned, it gave us the capability of lowering the roof heights to a more manageable 55, thus lessening the impact on the neighboring communities.
And we'd also, because of that, we still need a deviation of 5 feet
Yep.
before we're asking for 19.
We still tried to break up the massing from an appearance standpoint. I can jump to there real quick. So you can see we've begun to try to break up the massing just with materials and even how we step back some of the facade up on the front. I think you'll see that model that I handed around. Essentially what I'm trying to represent there is how much parking we're actually eliminating from the public view is really what that shows, and the enlargement of that interior courtyard.
And the other item related to parking, we did look at that. We are asking for a deviation of 71 parking spaces from the requirements. Instead of being typically 2.5 to 1 for units, we've reduced it down to about 1.7 per unit, which is pretty typical in what we're seeing in multifamily developments that we're working on these days. So if you have any questions of us, more than happy to answer them. The owner is here as well.
Thank you very much. Commissioners, questions? Barry?
Yes, you said you're down to 55 feet. Is part of that 55 feet a parapet to around the roof to
That
block
includes the
out?
parapet. That includes the parapet.
How tall is the parapet? You know how tall the
Roughly
parapet?
4 feet.
4
5
feet? Okay.
Right in that area.
We'll be going to staff, but staff had an opportunity to make that calculation as well, and there's agreement on the 55-foot height. Okay.
Yep.
Any other questions to the commission? Seeing none, we'll go over to staff. Joe, consultant. Dan, Gary, you have comments for us?
Okay. Some of what we'll go through is stuff that planning commissioners have heard before, of course, because we've been here. But for the benefit of anybody who's watching or in the audience who came to hear this case, I will go through it again. So we are talking about a site, it fronts on Northwestern Highway. It's currently got a mix of B2 and B3 zoning. Those are both commercial districts. It's 5.53 acres, mostly vacant. It used to be occupied by all or parts of several commercial buildings. There's no notable natural features on the site, such as wetlands or things like that. When we look around the site, to the north, there is the North Point PUD. That's a senior housing complex. To the east, there is some B3 zoning and there's some RC2 multiple family zoning. And it's developed as zoned. There's some commercial uses down on Northwestern Highway and then a multifamily complex to the east. To the south, that's across Northwestern Highway. We have B3 zoning. That's all commercial development. And then to the west, we have B3, B2, there's a PUD, and the North Point storage facilities there, and there's a couple smaller commercial uses as well. Site is proposed to be accessed from one driveway shared with the North Point PUD, and that's from Northwestern Highway only. There's no connection through to 14 Mile to the north. When we look at PUD qualification, back in February 2021, the Planning Commission granted preliminary PUD qualification to the site, and it cited objective 8 among the objectives that the plan has to meet, and I'll talk about that later. At the time, there was some discussion, and planning commissioners generally weren't concerned about the use, but there were several that expressed concerns about the scale, especially height and density. PUD was also reviewed by the Planning Commission on August 19th and June 2021 and June 16th, 2022. Decisions were postponed both times to give them some chances to work on it. They have worked on it. And they're back now with a updated version of the plan. Density and building height have both been reduced since the June meeting. They're now seeking their final PUD determination. They're not seeking concurrent site plan approval. They would return to you with a site plan if they are granted final PUD approval by council. And as we always note with PUDs, preliminary approval is not a guarantee of final approval. So we have criteria for qualification for PUD. So one of those criteria is that the use of the PUD option shall not be for the sole purpose of avoiding the applicable zoning requirements. And our note on that is that the proposed use, which is apartments, isn't permitted in the B2 or B3 districts. The portion of the site zone B2 is planned for multiple family residential on the future land use map. PUD shall not be utilized in situations where the same land use objectives can be accomplished by the application of conventional zoning provisions or standards. So what they're asking for is really outside of any of the districts we have in our zoning ordinance. They're asking for significantly more density than is permitted in our RC districts. And they give a rationale for that density in their narrative, essentially saying that the denser development serves as a step down to the RC2 district to the east from the commercial uses and regional thoroughfare to the south and east, or south and west rather. The planned unit development option may be effectuated only when the proposed land use will not materially add service and facility loads beyond those contemplated in the future land use plan, unless they can demonstrate to the satisfaction of the city that such added loads will be accommodated or mitigated. So the number of apartment units proposed on the site exceeds what we would permit in our multifamily districts. The site's current commercial designation, which is mostly B2 but includes some B3, supports a uses with a really wide array of traffic demands. Some of them, restaurants, for instance, might generate quite a lot of traffic, and others would generate less. The applicant did provide a traffic study in 2021. We've, as always, deferred to engineering for a review of its findings. The number of units has bounced around a little bit in the meantime. The complex is proposing to use the same access point to Northwestern Highway as the North Point PUD. So there's not going to be an extra curb cut if this gets built. We next have that set of objectives that I referred to earlier. There are 8 objectives. The Planning Commission has to find that the project meets, at a minimum, one of those objectives. And the applicant, initially applying, called attention to objectives 1, 2, 5, 6, 7, and 8. When the Planning Commission granted preliminary qualification, the motion to grant preliminary qualification cited objective 8, which is to bring about redevelopment of sites where an orderly change of use is determined to be desirable. A couple other criteria here. The PUD shall not be allowed solely as a means of increasing density or as a substitute for a variance request. Such objectives should be pursued through the normal zoning process by requesting a zoning change or variance. So they are definitely pursuing an increase in density. They are also proposing to do a use here that's not permitted in the underlying districts. So it doesn't seem like their request is made solely to avoid a variance. Several deviations from ordinance standards would be requested to facilitate the conceptual plan, though. Got to get to the next point I want to make here. When we look at the requirements for submission for final determination, we find that they have met those requirements. We've got a little table in here with a little check mark next to everything that they're required to submit. One thing we noted is that PUDs require that land use areas be represented and enumerated on the plan. They're only proposing one land use here, which is multifamily development. So the whole site is that multifamily designation. Now looking at the conceptual site plan and use. So you're not assessing the site plan in detail. They are going to be returning.
Joe, can I stop you there? Are there any questions, Joe, so far going through his review? I've got one question. So let's go over a process again.
Sure.
So we're not looking at a final plan?
We're looking at a request for final PUD qualification.
Okay.
We are not looking
Not
at
looking
a
at
detailed
revised,
site
we're
plan.
not, you looking at revised PUD plan 3 of 2021? So we're looking at the PUD,
Right.
not a final plan.
Yeah, we don't have a final site plan here. So some of the things that you would see on a final site plan, like preliminary utilities and things, are not included on the plans that have been provided.
So council would then receive our recommendation on the PUD, moving along, and then they would get feedback whether it would go any further after council decides whether they would want to approve the PUD plan.
Exactly.
Concept, right?
So council would approve the PUD with the zoning exceptions that they're requesting. And a PUD agreement is worked out, and then the site plan, the final site plan comes to us.
Right, and if they
We
said,
verify that it meets all the,
if the council said, yeah, we're interested, go ahead, and then they would say, basically direct them to submit a final plan.
exactly,
It
yep.
would come back to us.
That's correct, yep.
Maybe different than what we're looking at tonight, but something would come back to us, a plan.
Yes, that's
consistent
correct.
with the PUD that council allowed to continue
Exactly.
in the process. And then once the plan goes through us, then goes back to council, then there's an agreement, a plan and agreement, or is the plan, when does the PUD agreement occur?
The PUD agreement is after if the council approves the PUD, the agreement is then made between the council and the applicant, and then the final site plan comes to us.
Okay, so the
And
agreement,
we have to verify that the site plan meets the terms of the agreement.
so the agreement would come before the final plan.
Exactly, yep.
Okay,
Agreement comes as part of council's action. The PUD plan and the agreement are essentially at the same time.
okay.
Exactly, yeah.
Thank you, Joe. Now, go ahead with the plan.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, yes, thank you.
All right. Because I've been debating this in my head. The only thing that we're really agreeing on today, or we're going to be voting on today, is whether or not to allow the use as a multifamily residential.
Well, it's the use, plus you're making a recommendation on the exceptions from zoning requirements that they're asking for. So you're making a recommendation on that as well, which is one of the reasons that we've provided a detailed analysis of the concept plan that they provided, because that does include some things that they're asking for that might not be typical under zoning.
I mean, like higher density.
The higher density, height, there's a few things, yeah.
Right. Okay, so we're going to be voting on that tonight also, but not necessarily what it's going to look like. It's not going to necessarily look like.
That's right, yeah, the final look and things, the elevations would be part of the final site plan.
You know, where it actually sits on the lot, if they move it left or right or up and down, that's.
However, this is a planned unit development, and the city can place conditions on its approval of a planned unit development. So if there are things that the planning commission would like to note about what it wants in terms of materials, those could be conditions of a recommended approval.
All right.
Tom, would you like to add a little different
Yeah, I guess
clarification?
just a little. You're making a recommendation on this concept plan. If this is what ultimately gets approved by city council, the next set of plans, the final set of plans, have to be substantially similar to this.
Yeah,
I
they
mean, they're
will.
going to be You know, often you have developers come in and they want to do everything sort of in one big step. So they don't have to come back to you, so they give you detailed plans. This is sort of the way that the ordinance is literally set up. It's kind of a two-step process, but the second step of final plan is, it's going to be pretty darn similar to this unless the council approves an agreement that lets them change a bunch of stuff. So, you know, this is your time to, as Joe said, if you don't like it, now's the time to say, we don't like where it is, or you know, it's still too high, or, and I'm not saying you should say either of those things, but this is kind of your big shot. The site plan is, if it conforms with the agreement and the concept plan, you're going to be approving.
Exactly. Thanks, Tom.
Any other questions? Okay, Joe, continue. Thank you.
So getting into that conceptual plan that we're talking about here, they provided not just a conceptual site plan, but also some illustrations that give you a sense of what the thing will look like. And they're proposing 217 units. There's around, it's around a courtyard kind of design. Like I said earlier, the number of units has bounced around a little bit. The very first number I think we ever heard was 200. It went up to 253 at one point. It's down to 217 now. Still showing that access from Northwestern Highway. And, you know, when we talk about how the conceptual plan would be substantially similar to the final plan, you know, that's something that you would look at in the final plan is they preserve that single access point because that's something that you're basing your decision on in part. Ground floor of the building is devoted to indoor parking. All the living units are on the floors above. They've reconfigured their parking lot since their first design, which had a long dead-end aisle that wasn't compliant with our ordinance. They've also gotten rid of the spaces that were once along the east property line. So if you recall, the last version of this plan that we looked at had spaces that were directly abutting the eastern property line, right next to the multifamily. Those have been eliminated and replaced with a green belt. So there was no green belt over there before, and now there is one. The parcel is 241,995 square feet. So we determine density in our ordinance by the number of rooms. And when you have an efficiency unit, that counts as one room. When you have a one-bedroom unit, that counts as two rooms. When you have a two-bedroom unit, that counts as three rooms. And when you have a three-bedroom unit, that counts as four rooms. So they've reduced the number of proposed units from 253 to 217, and the number of each type of unit's been adjusted. So they're proposing 112 one-bedroom units, which is 224 rooms, 101 two-bedroom units, which is 303 rooms, and 4 three-bedroom units, that's 16 rooms. So there's a total of 543 rooms that are being proposed. That's the density that they're proposing here. And based on the standard that we have, there's a divisor. You divide the lot size by a certain number of square feet, and you get the number of rooms that are permitted. So when we look at the RC districts that we have, our densest RC district is the RC3 district. You divide the lot area by 1,050, and that gives you the number of rooms that are permitted. In that district, our densest RC district, the typical number of rooms that would be permitted would be 230. So they're at 543. Our densest RC district typically permits 230. So it's about 2.36 times the densest multifamily district in the city. Density has been decreased from the last iteration of the conceptual plan. We look at our master plan. We have a future land use map. It designates the portion of the site that's zoned B2 as multifamily residential. The portion that's zoned B3 was designated as non-center type business. And what non-center type business refers to is freestanding commercial sites as opposed to like a strip mall or something like that. Property is not addressed on our residential density map. It's adjacent to an area that's noted as high density on the residential density map. And that's described as being consistent with the RC3 districts. It's not part of any special planning area. We look at the dimensional standards of the underlying districts, the B2 and the B3. So generally speaking, it looks like the relief they're seeking there is twofold. They're looking for relief from the maximum height of those districts. Those districts both permit a maximum height of 50 feet. They're asking for 55, which, as was established earlier, 4 feet of that is the parapet, and the roof height is about 51-ish feet. And then the east side setback would typically be required to be 75 feet, because in those districts, we require that setback from any residential development. And they are requesting 54.47 feet on the east side there. The height of the building has been reduced from previous versions of the plan. It was, at one point, it was 69 feet that they were asking for. They've brought it down to 55, which is much closer to what's permitted in the underlying districts. The number of units, based on the counts of different types of units, would require 436 parking spaces under typical zoning. They are proposing 365 spaces. That's a ratio of 1.68 spaces per unit. That does require relief from ordinance standards. The Emerson was in the neighborhood of 1.65 spaces per unit, if you recall. Trees and preliminary landscaping. So preliminary landscaping, it's not as detailed a landscape plan as we would get with final site plan, but they are correctly accounting for the replacement in parking lot trees that would be required of them. And as I mentioned earlier, where the east property line previously just had parking spaces right up to the property line, they've been removed now, and they're proposing a landscape buffer area between this development and the multifamily complex to the east that was not there before. The Planning Commission and Council, you know, they might want to discuss additional landscaping, you know, as a condition of PUD qualification. And, you know, the details could potentially be finalized at final site plan review, but that's something you can discuss with the applicant. One thing that we hadn't called out previously, but I wanted to bring it up now so that it doesn't come out of nowhere at site plan. We did previously call attention to the lack of labeled bicycle parking, preferably within the garage and electric vehicle spaces. The narrative actually does have bike storage as an amenity now. I think adequate bike storage could potentially mitigate some of the impact of the deviation from parking requirements that they're seeking. One thing I just want to bring up about electric vehicle spaces, though, is that I think the way the auto industry is going, electric vehicle spaces are going to be absolutely essential to the future marketability of any multifamily project in the future. And, you know, they can address their location at final site plan review. But I do think that that's something that just needs to be brought up, because I think that, you know, communities are going to start moving in the direction where they're requiring electric vehicle parking spaces, or at least the infrastructure for it for multifamily very soon. Because, you know, as of 2035, you're not even going to be able to sell an internal combustion engine vehicle in California. So things are moving in that direction. We just want to make sure that that's on everybody's radar. So some considerations for the Planning Commission and City Council. It's a planned unit development. They're seeking some substantial deviations from ordinance standards. You can discuss with the applicant, you know, project elements that bring, you know, greater benefit to the wider community. You know, the design elements that you might like to see. We've already talked about the architecture. They've changed the architectural appearance of this building in response to previous conversations. And I just want to remind you of the 4 deviations from ordinance standards that they're seeking. So one is height, that they have got that 55-foot height as opposed to the 50 feet that's permitted in underlying zoning. One is the east side setback to that residential development there. They're proposing 54.47 feet. The usual requirement would be 75 feet, so that's a 20.53-foot deviation. Density, so going with the RC3 district as the base district, they're seeking a deviation of 313 rooms from the 230 that would be permitted. And then finally, parking, they're looking at 365 spaces where 436 would be required, and that's a deviation of 71 spaces. If there are any questions from me, happy to address them.
Any questions for our consultant? Joe?
I would like to discuss the environmental review that was in that package.
Environmental review?
Are we referring to our environmental engineers letter?
Yeah,
Oh, sure, yeah, gotcha.
Joe, you got a page, or you can cite a page or
it's
something?
only 1 page long,
Yeah, it's a
But it
one-page
was-
memo.
right in there.
Yeah, it's the back of the
Yeah.
page. I don't have it in my packet.
Okay, what was your comment or question?
Do we have a rep from engineering?
I have not heard about this environmental review.
Okay, environmental
are
review
you
is
looking
basically a stormwater management review.
I know what it is, but
The stormwater management review cites such things as bioswales,
yep.
you know, that I don't think would work here. What I was disappointed that in the review we got from the consultant, it pointed out that initially there was, I don't know, we'll call them assurances, that there would be green roofs, okay, as a stormwater management practice. They are not in the plans that have been sent to us, and I think that that should have been mentioned in the paragraph devoted to that. In the second paragraph, I was just curious as to whether or not the reference to the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection was a typo.
No, that's not a typo.
Okay, interesting. I accept that.
follow that standard.
I accept that. All right? Those are my 2 questions. Overall, I will say that I see a increase in demand for extra rooms so that people can work remotely and have an office in their apartment. And I think that given that there's going to be fewer people in this entire development than otherwise would have been with that many bedrooms years ago, and therefore, I'm not too worried about the parking.
Other questions?
I would agree with that.
Are we, yeah, Barry?
Okay, I asked Joe or Eric if they know. We're being, they're kind of comparing what they're trying to, they're asking for with what was approved from across the street.
Very comparable to the Emerson, yeah.
I'm sorry?
Yeah, I mean, it's very comparable to the Emerson in terms of parking, height, you know, the
Okay, that-
architecture.
The question I have is, the height is, what's the, do you know, recall what the height was of the place across the street?
I believe it's 53 feet?
53, yeah.
Emerson? What?
53.
53 feet,
Okay, so it's off by 2 feet.
right.
What about density?
Ultimately, I think we're probably a little lower in density here.
Jim, if you could share that with
Yeah, so the Emerson it's on some additional
It is a lot more land, certainly.
acreage, but they have more rooms per acre. It's 113 versus 98.
This is the comparison.
Yeah, a bit less dense.
So from a raw density standpoint, there are fewer rooms per acre here.
There's There's fewer rooms in the Emerson than there is in this proposal.
In this proposal than the Emerson. The Emerson is at 113 rooms per acre. This one's at about 98,
About 90, what?
98 rooms per acre.
Less, 113 and 98, right, Joe?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Wait, which is 113, Emerson or?
Emerson is 113.
This is the less dense project.
So you're saying Emerson is actually denser than
It
this one?
is, yes, slightly.
Oh,
Okay,
that takes care of that little
are
question.
you good?
Yeah.
Any other questions? Okay, so I want to go back to the issue of when the planning commission qualified this for a PUD. They cited like 3 sections. We identified one, right? Section 8,
Yeah,
that had to do with redevelopment.
that's correct.
So under the PUD, does it require you to maintain the zoning to redevelop it? Or are you open to any zoning to redevelop?
The PUD, our PUD essentially changes the zoning of a site. It can float over any zoning designation that we have on the map.
Yeah, I mean, it becomes a zoning district in and of itself.
It does,
So
essentially.
when we
yeah.
qualified it under Section 8 for a PUD, the applicant wasn't obligated to develop it under B2 and B3, right?
No.
Okay. So what we have before us is a residential proposal. That's
Right.
not a foul against the developer for coming in with something other than, for redevelopment.
No. They're allowed to propose that residential use with underlying commercial zoning, that's right.
So and also relative to the density issue, I heard the proponents say in their intro comments that they're comparable to the surrounding area, and we're saying they're not comparable. Is that based on, again, the change in use and how we look at R3 versus?
Well, they're not comparable to any of the multifamily districts that we have in our zoning ordinance. When you look at the standard multifamily zoning that we have, it only goes up to a certain density, and we don't have anything beyond that, and they're asking for something beyond that. Similar to the Emerson,
In another community.
exactly. So, they are similar to something recently approved, not built yet, but recently approved in the area. They're in one of the most built-up commercial areas of the city, I would say. But we don't have a lot of density that's comparable to this in the city in general.
Okay. And, okay. Are there any other questions for the proponent or staff before we open the public hearing? Gang, anything? We good? Okay. At this time, I'd like to open up for public comment. Please come forward. If you represent yourself, you have 3 minutes to comment on the project, or if you represent an association, you have 5 minutes. So this is the public hearing portion of the public hearing. Public hearing's open. Anybody would like to speak on this item, please come forward to the podium, address, give your name and your address, please. Okay, seeing none, public hearing is closed. Back to Planning Commission for further questions of the developer, staff, comments, discussion amongst ourselves. Go ahead, Joe, and then Barry. Then let me know if I'm neglecting somebody over here. And Steve. Okay, thank you. Joe,
I'm
go ahead.
happy to start this discussion.
Please, thank you.
Overall, I don't have any problems, with this plan. I hesitate with, what's becoming the overuse, one might think, of the PUD process here, and I'm glad that we've initiated the master planning process, and hopefully as a result of that, there'll be less PUDs. I'm I don't know, hesitant or disappointed that this only meets the one criteria, that we found it only met the one criteria when we gave our preliminary determination, and that's that the redevelopment of the site is an orderly change. Not sure how comfortable it is. That's in part why I brought up the green roofs that had been mentioned before, which fall under another category, number one. Another criteria, I shouldn't say category. And so I would, I know just to say, hey, throw a green roof on a building is an easy thing to say, and it may or may not be practical, but I would like you to explore that and explain why you can't or why you're so excited at doing it when we get to the site plan review. Is that appropriate? Okay.
Okay, thank you, Joe. Barry?
Well, the only the comment I wanted to make is that this has been evolving. The biggest problem that I have is this, in my packet, they gave me the May 2022 set of plans, and they said, I thought they got rid of that thing in the middle, and it wasn't on this one, so I don't know how I got these. I don't know I got these, but I think that...
Barry, did you want to answer from staff on that? Was there an issue, Eric, on the
No,
plans?
I had seen the plans since then. I didn't see the most recent plans though, but I do, when I saw that thing being passed around, I said, well, those things are gone. That the set of apartments in between where they put the pool on one side and an open space on the other side, they're gone on that thing. I said, that didn't match the plans that I was looking at. So I assume that's the reason why they lost a lot of units in there, is because they took away the middle thing. My main concern is I do believe that residential apartments is a good use there. I think it fits in. I think it acts as a buffer with the condominiums next door. And my main concern is for those condominiums next door. And the only thing, one thing, the height doesn't bother me that much. I'm glad they brought it down from as far as they did down to almost the 50 feet, and then the last 4 feet is the parapet, because I knew you had to have a parapet. I am concerned about the density, and I hope there's enough parking there, but what I am looking at is that since this is a PUD plan and we can put in our own 2 cents worth, and there are some recommendations made by the consultants and by our own staff, and I think that that should be included if we are to go forward with this. Again, I think that an apartment building is appropriate there, and but I think that there should be, and this was also recommended, there'd be more along the side of the building where the condos sit, that there'd be, and I'm glad they took the parking out of there. From what I understand, they put a green belt in there. I think that as a part of that green belt, they should put in taller trees and some trees that don't lose their deciduous and deciduous. How's that? And so that there's something there all year long to give somewhat of a buffer to the neighbors next door, because you're not doing the 75 feet. But since you're willing to put more density, more landscape density in there, I think that would protect the neighbors from everyone looking at each other. And I think that's probably their major concern too. But I just hope you have enough parking. That's all I gotta say. And my other main concern is that if it's pretty much matching what's supposed to go in across the street, if it ever gets built, or if this ever gets built, that we don't go higher in density than what was across the street. And from what I'm hearing from staff, it's actually lower. It's higher than normal density, but it's still lower than what we approved for across the street.
Correct.
And so in that respect, it's kind of hard to say no. But that's my comments at this point.
Thank you, Barry. Steve?
Yeah, I guess going back to Joe's comment to start with, if we want a green roof, now is the time to say it. If it gets past the PUD and it's not part of the PUD, the site plan does not have to have it, and we can't mandate it as part of the site plan. It's got to be mandated as part of the PUD, because it's not part of the ordinance or the zoning. So if you feel strongly about it, I would recommend making sure that that's in the motion.
Yeah, to echo Steve, I mean, you do have a lot more discretion in this PUD approval than you would in the site plan approval to ask for something like that. So this would be the opportune time for conditions like that to be recommended.
And here, honestly, I'm unsure of the practicality. If I knew it was practical, I would require it. I'm sure these nice gentlemen have heard me, and, you know, they only need one criteria, and they've got one, but I just don't, it's a lot of weight up there. I don't know that it's going to be practical to build. So if we require something that is not practical, then we've pretty much shot it down.
Okay? So I guess to go on to my comments, again, I think this is way too dense. I thought it was way too dense to start with.
Yeah.
And Barry alluded to, or said the same thing that I have a concern with, is the height and the setback from the residential. The Emerson didn't have that issue of being close to a residential complex. This is going to be tall and right on top of that residential complex. At a minimum, the side next to the residential should be a floor less to make up for the setback. So that angle that you're looking at to the top of the building is the same angle as if it was set back 75 feet. That's my view. We're talking that this is going to be 28% closer than the setback normally would allow. And that's just way too close in my mind at this height to be on top of residential. And again, I'm unhappy with the density as a whole, but I like the idea of an apartment complex, but this thing is massive for that small of a piece of land. And the setbacks, especially to the residential, are way too close.
Okay, thanks, Steve. Other commissioners, comments, thoughts?
Yeah.
Where are you at? John?
I think it's an improvement from what we saw, but I would agree with what Steve said. I think it's still a massive block, but I have a question for staff. I'm looking at the landscape plan, and I know it's not a final plan, but I see like only 12 trees, roughly, if those circles are trees. Can we require a wall along the eastern side? Cement wall?
Yeah, you could, well, yeah, there would have to be a wall on that side, that would be required, but, yeah, you can require a wall, and you can require, enhanced landscaping there as well.
Oh, yeah, no, I mean, definitely the wall and then some trees in front of it to break up the concrete. And then how tall, what's permitted or allowed, or can
I
we?
mean, typically, we permit 6-foot walls. I'm trying to think of whether or not it would be a deviation from ordinance standards if you went higher than that. But a 6-foot screen wall is the typical, and what you're trying to screen with a wall is the parking from the neighboring use, which is why 6 feet is typically adequate. But then as far as landscaping on that side, you can, of course, require enhanced landscaping over there.
Yeah, and you may not want to have a wall, right? If it doesn't serve a purpose, you may want to, bolster your landscaping.
I mean, if there was columnar junipers planted, 6 foot on center, like, well, Genopolis is a good example. I mean, we required that 40 years ago. And it came out nicely, and the trees are still growing. And it screens the apartment to the west, so
Sure.
I could go something like that, but I just think this is kind of skimpy.
Yeah, if you were looking for a solid evergreen screen, you could say that. And then you can have deciduous trees planted in front of that they kind of work together to give you additional height when it's leaf on, but opacity in the winter.
Okay.
Any other questions? I have a question for the developer. So when you originally submitted, if somebody wants to come up to the podium, answer my question, when you originally submitted, did you have an environmental aspect argument to be made for your project? And if you did, what was it? If you could refresh our memories.
I think the idea was to help mitigate any environmental impacts the building might have. It was never talked about to eliminate any green roof type mentality. In fact, the entire parking structure has a green roof on it, which is unlike any development around. So that just becomes the interior courtyard. So we're actually implementing those mentalities. We're trying to slow down stormwater to the system. And again, I'm not against any kind of implementation of that. I think the reality is we never eliminated it from the project, and we just proportioned it to different parts of the building.
Well, we appreciate reminding us of that fact. Also, have you done like baseline environmentals of the existing property? Have you run into site contamination, or what do you anticipate to find? Maybe Jim?
Now, I don't know if phase one phase one's been completed, and
Yeah, site's clean.
Okay.
The site is clean.
Site's
There's no
clean.
environmental, recognizable environmental issues.
Okay. Okay. Well, from my standpoint, I'm comfortable with the project going forward. I think I understand the counsel from our city attorney about, this is basically what they're proposing. That's the density, that's the height, kind of where it's going to be located on the property. But I think this is something that we initiated a qualification. Redevelopment's always a good thing. We have comparable development in the proximity to this development that is successful elsewhere in the area. And while I know that there are impacts on neighbors, anytime there's change, there's going to be an impact on neighbors, and it's up to us to do the best we can to help mitigate those effects and make sure that, we're establishing good neighbors and good neighborhoods. So I'm comfortable with supporting going forward. I know we have issues of the height. We have the setback issues. I'm always confused about the issues of the motions when we have variances of this and variances of that. In essence, we're doing a PUD. We kind of set the rules. So I understand the staff indicating we got a height issue. We've got a setback variance issue. We have a density issue. And again, that's another one of those issues that again, this is a PUD. We're varying from what? PUD allows us to use whatever zoning we want under the PUD for redevelopment. That's what we're doing. So a variance from what? And a parking variance from our standard. But, if we get a sense of what the trends are now and people working from home and maybe converting bedrooms to offices and things like that, that's part of our master planning process we're going through right now. We've got to be kind of hip on what we envision how these units are going to be used in the future. So, I'm not overly concerned about the density, and I'll trust them on the parking. And they've got risk capital involved in what they're doing. So, I'd be in favor of still moving this forward. And if someone would like to make a motion, craft a motion that we could consider for tonight, give these folks some direction. Yes, Steve.
Okay, I'm ready to make a motion. We'll see how it goes, but.
Let her rip.
Yep. I move to recommend to City Council that PUD Plan 3, 2021, dated May 18th, 2022, submitted by NWH Holdings LLC, be denied for the following reasons. Height, exceeding the height restrictions, exceeding the density restrictions, and the setback on the east side.
Okay, is there support for that?
I'll support.
John, supported, moved by Steve, supported by John to deny it for the reasons stated. Any discussion of the motion? Barry?
Well, I think that Steve gives very good reasons, and I agree with the reasons that Steve gives. I will not go support this because I think that because of the PUD, using the PUD provisions, we can put put our own recommendations in there on this and require them to do things that I think will help protect the neighbors from these buildings next door. I did like one of the ideas of doing the levered approach, but I don't know that that's economically or actually physically possible to do in a building situation. But I agree in most part of what you're saying, but I think that we can craft something that this board could agree to that will put limitations on there that we want to see and still allow the developer to develop an apartment complex in that location. And I think that would be I just think that an apartment in that location is a good use for the property, because I don't think anything else could go in there. And driving up and down Northwestern, I'm sick and tired of seeing an underdeveloped, very old-looking, tired property. You know, I'd like to see something that's going to bring something to the community instead of detract. So that's my position.
Any other comments on the motion? I won't be supporting the motion. Okay, I'll call the question. All in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Steve? John? Opposed, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Kristen? Okay. Motion fails.
Hey, Barry.
Okay, so, Barry?
Okay. I move to recommend to the city council that PUD Plan 3202-2021 dated May 18, 2022, submitted by NWH Holdings LLC be approved because the plans are consistent with the goals, objectives, and policies of the master plan and applicable provisions of the planned unit development option in section 34-3-20 of the zoning ordinance, subject to modifications of the zoning ordinance requirements as indicated on the proposed plan. Further modifications of the zoning ordinance requirements as follows: allow a height not to exceed 55 feet in any location on the building, density not to exceed 217 units in the building, parking spaces of at least 365 spaces, a side yard on the east side of the building at 54 feet instead of the 75 feet, under the following conditions. That as a part of the PUD plan, that there be a requirement that there be green roofs if that is feasible, as far as structurally feasible. The underground water storage requirements is set forth by the environmental review dated June 7th, 2022. And it sets forth requirements of proper water storage on the premises and other things, and provide calculations and details for the underground detention system. What else do I have? That on the east side of the building, that a higher density of landscape material be used, including taller trees, and I think you indicated arborvitae or?
Clematis, something that's green and stays green year-round.
Yeah, but deciduous and deciduous plants, so that there are taller plants as a blockade, and there are taller trees such as arborvitaes that will act as a blockade between the residential condominiums to the east and this project, and if necessary, a 6-foot screen wall. But I would prefer that even if you do the 6-foot, even if there's a 6-foot wall, that there still be the taller trees and the other shrubs as a way of blocking the view. And I think that I probably overstated my welcome. I think that probably covers everything and all the. Do I have to state which parts of the ordinance that this would cover? This section 8.
Oh, you should make that finding, yes.
Yeah, well, I think.
Yeah, yeah, the objective that's being met should be cited, yes. Objective 8.
It would be objective
8,
8, VIII.
redevelopment.
I think there was another one. And I think they would promote the goals and it'd be 6. They promote the goals and objectives of the master plan for land use, which does call for multifamily in that district.
Okay.
Okay, do I have a second to Barry's motion?
Second.
Okay, Kristen, second. Discussion on the motion. Steve?
Did you want to add anything about bicycle parking and electric vehicles?
Oh, yeah. I thought they were going to do, I thought the bicycle parking was a part of that already, but that is a part of their plans that they have spaces for bicycle parking and that they do allow for recharging stations on the premises because when this thing gets built, that's going to be the next big thing. And so, yes, and that is a part of the plan that they add recharging stations.
You want to specify a number or just leave it open?
I don't know how it would, 3, 5, what?
I don't either.
It's-
3 to 5.
What would be good, Joe?
I would say that at a minimum, they should install the infrastructure. They're building a structure, get the conduit in the ground. And
Possible to expand.
Then they
yeah,
can
exactly. Then they can add space,
Judge their demand.
add chargers as they need to. If they've got the conduit there, it's a not much of a tall order to add more chargers.
Gerald, you got that as part of the motion? Put the necessary infrastructure in for
EV charging.
chargers?
I do. I did have one question, if I could ask it.
But please.
If you said if necessary, 6-foot screen wall, and for me, when I'm writing that motion, that's really muddy. Like, what does if necessary mean?
Well, I mean, if it's required by ordinance or by the planning department or engineering.
Well, yeah, I mean, the wall will be required to the extent that it's a parking area adjoining a residential
Right,
district.
we'll
so-
look to staff to tell us whether we don't want to frustrate or any kind of landscape we want to do there. So you let us know what makes sense. Is that okay?
sure.
What makes sense to the wall and what makes sense for landscaping?
Right.
Okay, okay.
I think
Cheryl?
Yeah. Thank
Okay.
you.
Kristen, you good with the amendment to the motion?
Yeah, still good.
Okay, still good? Any other comments on the motion? All in favor as outlined by Barry, say aye. Aye. Opposed, say nay.
Hey.
Nay. John and Steve. The ayes have it. You move on to the city council with your PD concept. Okay, we'll see you down the road. Thank you for coming in. Okay, do that.
You put that away.
Carry 5 too.
The next business item is on our regular business is the zoning text amendment 1 of 2022. It's an amendment to zoning ordinance chapter 34 and amend the time period that recreational equipment or trailers may be parked on a residential premises during loading or unloading. The action requested tonight is for us to set it for public hearing as we do with zoning ordinance amendments. Sections affected are 34-5.7.1 and 34-5.7.4. I believe that's why we start with staff on this one, right?
Yeah.
Okay, take it away.
Yeah, so essentially, this came down, there's been a little talk at city council, the mayor level, came down to our department through the city manager that, to kind of look into the reasonableness of that 24-hour period and see whether we're in line with other communities. So we kind of did that, looked at what other communities are doing in that respect, saw that the norm really was closer to 72 hours, to allow for that. And then also a number of communities were silent on the issue, really. If I would have broadened this sample to include a lot of other communities, it would have just said none specified for probably another 6 or so that I could have added here. So, yeah, I mean, 72 really emerged as kind of the norm for this. It's been discussed whether, it's kind of placing an undue hardship on people to only have 24 hours when you return home from vacation and need to kind of do those things to maybe wax the trailer or do what you need to do to get it prepped to put into storage or whatever happens after that. So it's just kind of a question of whether that 24 hours is enough time. You're kind of trying to strike a balance between these things not becoming a permanent fixture of the neighborhood, but giving people the flexibility to do what they need to do when they're coming and going on vacation, so.
Eric, questions for Eric? Joe?
I guess I'm ready to debate the darn thing. Eric, you know, when I first looked at it, it said 72 hours.
Right.
Then when I actually read it, it said 72 hours over 5 days.
5-day cumulative period, right?
You know, where the hell does the 5 days come from? And isn't that just one headache in terms of enforcement?
Actually, it kind of makes it a bit clearer because if you left it open at just open-ended at 72 hours, when does that clock start and end? I mean, that's the question. So if you say within a 5-day period, you've actually made it specific enough.
Why don't we say within a 3-day period?
Well, then you would just say 72 hours, but then is that 72 hours, you know, straight through?
Okay.
Or could you, you know, maybe take it out of the driveway for 24 hours and come back? I think that's when you get into more issues of that kind of interpretation. But when you say cumulatively within this 5-day period, I mean, you get 72 hours within 5 days period. It's a little bit easier to
I
nail
was
down.
simply trying to make life easier for your coworkers, and you're saying, no, I'm just making their lives difficult, so I will shut up.
Joe, we always appreciate it. Not that you shut up, that you try to make it easy for all of us. Krista?
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing, Joe, when I read it, about the 72 hours and 5 days, but then I think the last sentence clarified it when it said you cannot live, sleep, or when it's parked on your lot. So I think then that would hopefully mitigate the idea that people are just living in their trailer, moving it away for 2 days, coming back and living in their trailer every so many days, so.
Right, this language as written was actually intended to prevent a little bit of that gamesmanship because we see where people, you know, kind of come with these competing interpretations. You know, to have it open-ended, it's a lot easier for people to make those arguments than it is to limit it to this cumulative 5-day period. And the other one, and that kind of emerged as a best practice from, you know, many other communities kind of specified that 72 hours is within a larger time frame. And I did see some that did, you know, 7 days in the week actually instead of 5, and that's something to consider perhaps. But 5 or 7 was kind of the two ways that you would go with that.
Was the 72 hours, was that like a survey of other communities?
Yes.
Or is that what we did?
Yeah, a variety of surrounding communities. I mean, I looked at Livonia, Novi, Southfield, Troy, West Bloomfield. Yeah, it's the trend out there certainly to be at 72.
Yeah, and it's always good to be reasonable with our ordinances so that when we enforce them, there's some reasonableness that we're giving the property owner some time to do practical things.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, if you just kind of go through the thought of what it takes to, you know, get these things set up and, you know, unset up at the end of the vacation, you know, it's going to be easier for some people to do that in 24 hours than others.
Just unpacking it. Okay. So do I have a motion to set it for public hearing?
Yes.
Would it be October? October public hearing?
This would be I would essentially say the next available meeting agenda because we're not certain whether we're going to be holding a regular meeting in October yet.
Public hearing? Oh, okay. Who wants to make? Sanji, you want to make the motion?
I do. I make a motion that the zoning text amendment 1-2022, I move that the zoning text amendment 1-2022 be set for public hearing for the planning commission's next available regular meeting, which is October.
Well, next available.
Would be to the next available agenda, essentially.
The next available.
So the next available.
Excellent. Thank you. We got a second on that?
Yep. Steve.
Steve, thank you, sir. Okay, moved and supported to set it for the next available public hearing. All in favor, say aye. 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 Opposed, say nay. No nay. It passes. We'll look forward to seeing that at a public hearing. Let's see, next item for business, we have Cheryl's minutes of October 18, 2022, the special and regular. So we had an opportunity to peruse, check it out, Okay, if so, do we need two separate motions or just one?
One is fine unless there's questions.
You good with one, city attorney? Thank you. We have a motion to approve the minutes. Barry, thank you.
I move the minutes for August 18th, 2022 for the regular and special meetings be approved.
Support by John. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it. Public comment. See, we have a couple folks in the public with us tonight. Good evening. Thanks for joining us. Do you have any public comments for us? Very good. We were just here to listen about the... Okay. Come on up to the podium. Just, come on, just...
Support on the record, please.
Really all matters.
Save some public support on the record, it's always good, so.
Come on,
So
let
if we
folks
can,
know at home that we actually have
get you to
folks
do
in
that.
our attendance tonight. So your name and your street address.
Cindy Lukács, 35263 Edith Drive. I believe, John, we're neighbors.
Neighbor.
Yeah. Good guy.
Yeah. So yes, we strongly support the 72 hours. We got a letter this summer because our trailer was in over the 24-hour period, and it is very difficult to transition, so we would really appreciate that.
I didn't rat you out.
You didn't rat me
Oh,
out?
I didn't rat you out.
So to load it, unload it, maintain it, whatever, it takes more than 24 hours. And especially if you traveled a long way and you're tired and whatever, and the last thing you want to do is like take on a project.
Right, and
Understand.
working full-time, all that, is very difficult. If we get home late on a Sunday, and then we have to return it to that Sunday, or the Monday, it's pretty hard to do that, going into work, all that, so.
Very good. Well, thanks for coming tonight. And my associate has a question. Joe, you have a question for a resident?
Joke. Have you given any consideration to letting your in-laws live in the trailer?
No.
We were discussing senior living in the study session before.
Okay.
We'll be breaking up somebody's home here.
Thanks
So hopefully they're not watching.
Thank you for your comments. Okay, that's public comment. Commissioner comments. We'll start at that end. Joe, you're on a roll.
I've
Anything
said
else?
too much.
No, not enough
That's my
tonight,
comment.
actually. Barry.
Yeah, I have a question, it's probably an engineering question more than anything, because I'm on Orchard Lake Road and we're somewhat befuddled about what's going on between 13 and 14 Mile Road. And I thought it was the intention of when they're putting the second roundabout, that they were going to be putting in like a barrier north of that roundabout going up close to the roundabout at 14 Mile Road, to keep people from turning left out of where the McDonald's is back to go north on Orchard Lake Road. I thought it was to force them to go south and then do the turnaround to come back north, because they're still taking left turns out of there.
Yeah, they weren't able to get that in there.
Oh,
You
so
are
there's-
still able to turn left out of that McDonald's.
So they're still gonna be able to make left turns out of there, and that's where the major causes of accidents are occurring at that intersection.
Yep.
That's the dangerous point, yeah.
Is that because they didn't have enough land?
What was the point of it?
Was that a lack of the land?
They have funding.
Yeah, there was a lot of things that we weren't able to get in that, because it's an RCOC project, so it's not technically city. So we pushed for things, and some of the things we weren't able to get.
We can't put a sign that says no left turn.
We'll have to talk to Mark about that.
Okay, because I thought that was one of the main reasons to do that. They were supposed to be putting in a lane in the center, an island in the center there, and one of the reasons was to block people from turning left out of that shopping center and running into the people that are going north.
Right.
All right. It's a good idea.
Good question, Barry. The more we dig, the more we dig.
Yeah.
John?
No, I'm nothing.
I'm good. Tanji, how you doing?
Oh, I'm doing fine. I think, I really do like the change in the, for the trailer timeframe. I think that was well needed in this community.
look forward to, maybe we get some public comment on it, practicality of it, whatever. That's always helpful to have positive voices for change. So, thank you. Kristen?
No comment.
Thank you for coming. Thank you, Steve. Okay, I think that does it. Motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Jerry, all in favor of the motion to adjourn, say aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned.